Hello and welcome everyone to Living Blind. Today is going to be a little bit of a different show in a few ways. First of all, we are on video as well as being on audio. So this show will be on YouTube, or maybe we'll see another video provider, but we are visible and audible. So looking forward to the new format change. And another thing we're doing a little bit differently is we're having a bit of a round table discussion this time. Today, we are talking about masculinity and blindness. My name is Naomi Hazlitt. I am the podcast host, and today I am joined by Paul Mack and Jeffrey Rainey. And I'm going to hand it over to Paul. If you can introduce yourself, tell the folks a little bit about you, and then why masculinity.
Hi, I'm Paul Mack. I am a life coach. I just started my business quite recently. And in my coaching, I focus on a couple of different areas. They're called life purpose coaching, goal coaching, and happiness coaching. So I usually with clients end up combining those three things because you start off with, okay, we talk about what is your purpose in life, because often people aren't clear on that, and then we talk about goals and how to set goals and how to get through that process, that journey of getting from deciding on a goal to achieving it, because as we all know, it's about the journey, not just the destination. And happiness is important too, because I think, as I'm sure we'll talk about later on in this discussion as well, I'm a big believer in finding the joy in one's life and joy in the journey and finding the humor in it as well. And in terms of the masculinity, I was approached by Balance and asked if I was interested in coming on and talking about it, because there were a lot of people, they said a lot of people in groups at Balance were feeling some vulnerability, some issues around a lot of like blind men were feeling vulnerability around their masculinity. And it's always been an issue that I've thought about a lot myself and struggled with. And I've recently got involved in a men's group where I've done a lot of work around that.
Thank you so much, Paul. And Jeffrey, if you don't mind, if you could tell the folks at home a little bit about yourself and what brings you to this conversation today on masculinity.
Sure. So my name is Jeffrey Rainey. I live in Aurora, Ontario, Canada, which is just a short distance south from Toronto, where Balance is based. And I'll take the blame for being one of the voices behind behind the Balance's decision to reach out to Paul regarding this podcast and the topic of blindness and masculinity, because I was one who was someone who was fronting that conversation. And it's been a conversation I've been having with some of my peers as well, through various stages of life. And when we did some research on it, this being myself and other members of the organization, particularly in their pre-employment and community outreach programs, there really wasn't a lot of discussion publicly. There was some discussion on the sexual side of it regarding consent and disability, and also and disability in general, blindness and being wheelchair bound, having other disabilities as well. But there wasn't really anything more broad on the topic of growing up as a blind man and the topic of masculinity and how it is portrayed and how you perceive it and how the world perceives it, sort of in general. But as per myself, I am currently just doing some volunteer work in the community. I have also been probably a familiar voice to some listening. I've worked as the podcast producer for this very podcast, and it's really nice to be sort of behind the mic. Normally, I'm behind the scenes, pushing buttons, getting guests like Paul on here and putting things to air. But now it's nice to be, to come out from under the shadows and be on mic and on camera a little bit.
I think both of you already touched on some interesting points or jumping off points for our discussion, essentially. You both have talked about how it seems like there is this need for either disabled men or men of various backgrounds to address, what is masculinity, right? And then when we talk about disability and blindness, how does that threaten understandings of masculinity, or I guess challenge preconceived notions of masculinity? Either of you have any thoughts so far on just taking it from the beginning, like why is there's this tension, I guess, between disability and masculinity?
Well, certainly speaking from my own experience, and probably Jeffrey would say the same thing, that I mean, growing up and in my youth, I've had a lot of experience with feeling vulnerable. Not that I grew up with that stereotypical belief in men are this and women are that, but I certainly did experience, like, for example, I grew up partially sighted until I was 29. So 24 years ago, my retina and my one half good eye detached, and I've been totally blind since then. So that was a big adjustment, and I went through the whole thing that I'm sure a lot of listeners have experienced of cane or guide dog, and which one would be more empowering for me. So I definitely I know what it feels like to feel like all the things that are, so many of the things that are typically thought of as masculine things, whether it's driving, not being able to pick up a girl for a date in my car, that was an adjustment. I mean, again, I didn't have those stereotypes in my head, but even for me, it was like, do I really deserve, like when I was young anyway, I saw it as, do I really deserve this girl, when I can't, when she has to drive somehow, that just from the brainwashing from society that had that voice in my head.
You actually stole part of my answer, Paul, but I'll start from the beginning. So I was born completely blind. I was born with retinopathy of prematurity and was born almost 3 months early. And so I didn't grow up with sight, and for a lot of my childhood and upbringing, masculine, like what was masculine, what was feminine, was kind of nuanced. I mean, sure, on one, and in some ways I kind of feel like I had a foot in both camps. On one hand, I was big into, I was a car guy. I grew up in a car family, collecting cars, going to shows. And I also, enjoyed some rough play outside with friends, and some jokes and everything. But at the same time, which are stereotypically masculine things, but at the same time, I also, I had a foot in both camps on the school, on the playground, for example. On, one moment I'm playing tag and play wrestling with some guy friends of mine, and the next moment, I'm playing house with some of my friends that were girls as well. And there were certain things, like certain shows or certain artists that I liked to listen to, musicians that they picked up on, and they would tease me because we'd be around some other boys, and they would bring that up, and I would kind of blush, like, let's not talk about that, like, still, still watching, the show Arthur at age 10, and being around, I don't want the guys to know that, that's they're not supposed to be on to like that show anymore. But so that was kind of, in some ways, I guess it was not really a factor, but at the same time, it did get brought up in a more nuanced way, and in some ways kind of not explained very well. There were all these little hints of, like, here are some things that you should move on from, maybe in terms of what I was wearing, or some of it was just blind habits that everyone goes, if you grew up blind, or if you, there are some things that you, because you don't pick up on visual cues, you don't know what everyone else is and isn't doing physically. So there are just certain habits or stimulants that you, or stimming stimulants, is that what they call it, stimulus, that you
Yeah.
do that you aren't necessarily aware of. So that's one thing. But then there are just other things nuance wise, like, oh, don't wear that type of hat, but because everyone else is wearing baseball caps when you get older. And on one hand, it was like, well, I would go along with it, but on the other hand, I was like, why? What is it about that? And it was never really explained. And to Paul's point, once you get older, I think that there's definitely the relationship side, where the traditional masculine role, you are the chivalrous gentleman, you pick up the woman on your first date, you pick up your girlfriend on the first date. um, I can't think of any sort of visual cues, but I think in terms of like, there might be jobs that you are required, if you're working right away, it's tough to find work in certain areas. Like, you might not be, I don't know, a mechanic. It's tougher to get jobs like that if you can't see, and if you haven't really had a lot of exposure, if no one's been comfortable enough to teach you those sorts of things, and show you how to do them, like, for example, working with tools, or using, grills, or cooking and stuff, because it's hot and you have to make sure you don't burn yourself. But okay, that's not impossible, but there are just a lot of things that you are supposed to do, and you aren't really, and you're it's just expected. This isn't really something that is, this isn't an instruction manual, but at the same time, it's like you're raised, in a sort of environment, in a nurturing environment, and then just thrown into the deep end, like, go. And there's everyone else around you that is giving off a vibe of, nature first. If you have these kinds of things, you are not desired by the opposite sex, but without kind of explaining why.
Right, right. No, I agree with that completely. And example that's coming to mind for me, in terms of like people not, like society and the individual people and society in general, sort of not knowing how to help you reframe things and not see things in a negative way. Where I had to kind of teach myself was with driving. Like I had to teach myself, that like it took a lot of sort of like self-analysis, soul searching, you could say, to say, wait a minute, like it's like not being able to drive is a good thing. I mean, now I'm able to say to people, when they say, "Oh, I bet you wish you could drive." I'm like bleep no, man. Like the insurance and the parking and the cost and the gas and the ugh, like
Being able to
being
fall asleep in the passenger seat is quite fun. You can't do that behind the wheel
sorry, was
more
it?
than once. And I feel like driving's been one of the big things here, but I think also just physical attraction. If you've never had vision before, and you're, say, for example, at a crowded place, let's say, you're now an adult and you go to a bar, and you're supposed to, or you're at the mall or somewhere outdoor in public where there's a lot of people, and you're supposed to scope a crowd out, scope someone from the crowd that you're attracted to. Well, if you can't see, you have to then, oh, and if someone's staring at you, for example, you don't know that. There has to be that extra layer of connection there. And yeah, it's fun water to try and navigate.
You never hear, "I smelled her from across a crowded room.
Oh.
You
Our
know,
aromas met, and we just knew." Like,
if you walk up to someone and compliment them on the way their voice sounds, and it's attractive to you, it's isn't really seen as the most. It's seen as a little invasive at first. you know. But in reality, that's one of the key things that's brought you to them.
I'm listening to both of you go back and forth, and there's just so many things to unpack, right? And I hope you don't mind if I kind of give you a bit of a recap of what I've been picking up so far on, the connection between blindness or disability and masculinity. I think one point that came up is, well, throughout we were talking about how, nobody, I guess maybe some people are sat down and told this, but generally you're not sat down and told, hey, you're a man or you're a woman, and this is how what men or women do, right, in every situation. So we're kind of left at some point, especially as we get older, to fill in the blanks, and the blanks are usually filled in by society, but then some are not. There's a lot of questions around, well, like how am I supposed to act, and then what do I want to do, to your point, Paul, around driving. I mean, as a sighted person, I drive very, very regularly, right? Like, for example, I take the subway, I like to walk, but I felt this tension at some point, until I got old enough to not really care. But this idea that, oh, like, you're not really an adult or an independent adult unless you learn how to drive. And I can imagine that perhaps as a man, like, to your point, Paul and Jeff, that feeling might be stronger, and also stronger with other things, like you were saying, learning how to grill or how to use tools or things like that. So am I on the right track so far?
Absolutely. And sometimes, like, if you're, I feel like public transit is a lot of times ascribed to being poor. And so, one, yes, you might not be able to drive. Being able to drive is seen as a signifier for adulthood. Two, if you can't, well, you have different options, some of which are very tenuous or expensive if you're talking about cab fares. But then once you add a disability onto that, if you add blindness, well, now you've got to be really good at O&M if you're going to work around the transit system that your city or town may or may not have in place.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, like, if you're lucky enough to be in a I think that's what you're kind of saying, that if you're lucky enough to be in Toronto like I am, or in a bigger city, you're more likely to have more accessibility. But of course that has its own challenges. Like, for example, some of the times, when I struggle with, feeling vulnerable and not confident, is just, when I'm at a big subway station and trying to figure out where the buses are, and they're just like, I in that moment where, like, that there are, like, you can hear people all around you, you're in a big crowd, but it's like, excuse me, and nobody notices, and it's like I'm in, that cliche of I'm in the middle of a huge crowd all alone. And
Yeah, and I mean, I'm thinking about, the how it feels to ask for help as a man. I'm curious, as a blind man, how does that feel? I guess it's not fair for me to ask you, like, how does it feel versus being a blind woman, because, you don't have someone with that experience. But do you think there's that connection of needing or wanting assistance, and how that kind of maybe clashes with ideals of what it is to be masculine?
well, again, it's something that I feel like I've had to teach myself, and now I feel privileged that I have the opportunity, through coaching, to hopefully guide others around this. But just that again, to me, it's about mindset. It's about redefining independence and assistance, and seeing it not as like, that I'm asking, the fact that I'm asking for help means I am helpless. No, it means that I am empowering myself. I am making myself less helpless by using the tools available to me to do what I need to do in order do what I want to do and get where I want to go. I mean, you know, if that means, so yeah, that means like asking for assistance. Um, how is that any, I mean, it does it make me helpless that I use a guide dog to help me get around? No, it's just, it's a tool. So I'm using what's available to me. And, you know, instead of shying away, and I mean, I could just stay at home. Um, but no, damn it, you know, I'm using my confidence in myself, and you know, maybe you could call that the masculine side of myself that I think everybody has. I mean, maybe we'll get more into that esoteric stuff later, but that everybody has, to have the confidence to say, you know, that I'm still okay. It doesn't make me any less of a strong person to do whatever I need to do, and get support, because everybody needs help with something. Like nobody does everything themselves, right? Like,
I think it's a little bit of both gender, but also disability. So starting out, I don't like growing up for me. It was never a gender thing, but I did struggle. I know that it's going to be hard for people to believe by by my presence here, but I did struggle with speaking out and asking for help, and even just approaching people when I was younger, and especially into teenhood. Because I just knew one dimension. I only saw sort of straight in front of me, figuratively. I wasn't thinking about being resourceful. So I'd say that was more of just a shyness thing. And I was definitely talkative, but I really had trouble just asking for help and knowing how to ask for help. One of the big turning points that really nailed it for me was when I was learning how to get home rather, using the bus from school. So getting home from school using the bus to home. And while there was construction going on during my normal route, I had to take a different route, which involved a regional bus that only went so far. And then I had to cross a small street where there isn't a lot of people around. And when I was first learning it, I realized very quickly, okay, my options are, if someone comes around, either I put my pride aside and ask for help and get where I'm going, or I I don't ask for help, and then I sit there for another half hour waiting for someone else to come by. And I guess there is in the sense of, in the name of self confidence and being weak and asking for help. And I realized very quick it's more of a pragmatic thing than there is a gender thing. But I think gender is the basis for that.
There's another piece of this as well that I'm wondering. So, both you, Paul and Jeff, you talked about asking for help and how, there's that, I feel like in a conversation about gender roles, we're going to touch on stereotypes. So the stereotype that's coming to mind is, not asking for direction. So as you were saying, Jeff, that's honestly not really an option, because you've got places to go. And Paul, I think you said something similar. You could stay at home, or we'll use your guide dog, or, every so often, perhaps ask for assistance. So that's one dimension, it sounds like, where these things kind of collide, but there's not just a gender issue, it's an issue of pragmatics. I do want to shift the conversation, though, and I don't know if we may talk pragmatically, but something that both of you mentioned that I want to learn more about is the piece around dating and physical attraction, because, it's true. Like, from my perspective, I got the sense pretty early on that in our society, men are supposed to make a lot of moves and do a lot of that initial work to get a relationship going. Not that that's really been something that has worked for me, but I kind of got the gist that many women would kind of say, oh, well, is he going to text you back? Is he going to call me back? And me, I mean, I'm a little oblivious, so I was like, well, why don't you just text him back? But I know it doesn't really work that way for everybody. So I don't know if, Paul, if you want to start can you speak a little bit more to how, blindness has changed that conversation around dating or attraction or, smelling a woman from the other side of the room, as you put it earlier?
Mm. Well, for me, my experience, first of all, was, as I said earlier, that in my youth I did have some vision in one eye. I was able to see a few feet away. So while I mean, it was weird because I like on the one hand I couldn't make out detail quite enough to tell facial expressions. So that definitely uh, like cut down on the cues that I could get. But I I I don't, maybe I don't need to say confess, but I confess that I did have just enough vision to be to be a little superficial about like there were certain physical traits like I could see a woman's hair, so I would say, oh, she has great hair, like that would draw me. So but then, as I said, when I lost my vision as a young adult, there was definitely an adjustment there, um, and I think that kind of helped me, I think, mature, and get beyond the look of women. But in terms of what was I going to say? In terms of society, um, yeah, I certainly got a lot of those messages, um, even from people who, even from like parents who were pretty liberal in a lot of ways. There was still a bit of a message of, well, women need to feel safe, and so you need to know that what like you need to be a rock for them, kind of idea. But I think two things happened that helped me. Um, One, and it's kind of complicated, but like I've learned that is true to an extent, but not as much as society thinks. So part of it was realizing that okay, there are, women need that to different degrees. There are women who don't need that at all. So I can find it. So it's about finding a partner who who also sees beyond that, and doesn't need that so much. Who is confident and strong in themselves. But the other part of it was that I became confident enough that I realized that okay, it's not I may not be, like society's, Mr. Masculine, but I do have in just, like, my blindness doesn't keep me from being a person who can make a partner feel safe when they need it. There are other ways other than those stupid superficial things like being able to drive, or being able um, to do whatever, to see danger from across the room or whatever it is. I can help them feel safe with with words and caring and love, and things that blind people can do just as well, at least as well as sighties.
Yeah, this is a long conversation, and it's really tough not to get sociological with it, because I think this is going on. It's a topic of whereas masculine, what is the future of masculinity on top of blindness, on top, including blindness within that. Yeah, it is tough not to get sociological with this question, because there is the topic of what is blindness, where does the blindness factor come in, and also what is the future of masculinity in general. um, by the traditional scopes of masculinity, there is that aura of strength, protection in the sort of brute force, or being protective, spotting danger, in a very sort of primal sort of way, can be regarded as safety. And if you are good at that, then like if you're good at self-defense, which doesn't hurt regardless, but if you are naturally good at that, more power to you. But to Paul's point, safety, be a woman feeling safe around you comes in many different ways outside of just physical strength. And I think that if it's someone who is genuinely interested in you as a whole, as a human, as the 3D, wholehearted, and even vulnerable self that you are, then that won't be a factor. It's I don't think the right woman would say, I would love you so much, you would be Mr. Right if you were just a tad bit stronger. And if they did, you might want to look elsewhere if that's not your type. Sort of speaking from experience on the dating side of things, I remember just on the personal side when when a relationship ended, I struggled with I did some soul searching in terms of where to go from here, what worked, what didn't work, and you're always going into the woulda, coulda, shoulda. You're always ruminating on things, and where to go forward. And when I would look at coaching advice, there were aspects of it that weren't described, that didn't depict who I was, and that was almost like, well, if I'm not that, then am I desirable? The whole, I think, clinginess, or I think being not being the first to text back or making the first move is a way, an ill-explained way of avoiding being clingy. Because if you're not supposed to give off a vibe of interest and you leave it up to the other person to want that, if mystique is supposed to be the driver here, you run the risk of not getting what you want.
I think the bigger point being that, yeah, I mean, I think that a person who says, well, you got everything else is great except you don't drive, is missing out, right? And there are people who have those standards. I mean, we haven't touched on this subject, but in the visual world, one thing that just baffles me is the whole I only date men who are taller than me. You're cutting out so many people who could be such a good match for you. So I think maybe looking beyond those individual things, like, if you can't grill, you can't chill. I don't know, right? Like you can't, it's just one of those things where people are so much more than the things that they can do. And then I think both of you made a great point around safety and how safety isn't always looking for threats around in the world and protecting somebody from them. Safety can be being somebody you can talk to and share your feelings, emotional support, helping be behind somebody as they pursue their goals. Like, it can look very different. So I guess, again, to kind of summarize, there's the take people as a whole beyond masculine traits or feminine traits for that matter. And yeah, maybe don't be so quick to judge, and it's okay just to be yourself and communicate in the way you want, and maybe just don't get so caught up in how it's all supposed to work, right?
It's not like any woman who deserves to be with you is gonna sit there, oh gee, I can't be involved with you because if I ever have cancer or something and I need someone to help me through that, you're not gonna be able to do that because you're not tall enough. Or whatever, right? But if I can expand on Jeff's point, when he was talking about vulnerability and quote unquote masculinity, and this is just actually a connection that I just made in my head. One of the things that I always told my son growing up, when he talked about being scared, that how the idea that courage doesn't mean not never being scared. It means being scared but doing it anyway. And the connection I'm drawing here is that quote unquote masculinity, or being confident as a blind man, isn't about never feeling vulnerable. It's about feeling vulnerable, but knowing that you're still strong anyway. And in fact, that being able to connect with that vulnerability, I think just makes you stronger. And if I can just tell a quick story to illustrate that from my own life experience, a couple of years ago, right at the beginning of COVID, actually, I had one day, I um, I decided to go out for a walk, and I heard this guy kind of yelling and sounding weird, out in the hallway of my apartment building, So I waited a minute, and then I went out, and this was before I got my new guide dog. So I had a cane. So I uh, went out of my building, and there was this guy out there, and he starts kind of following me, being aggressive, like, oh, I know you're faking it. You're not blind, this deal. And I luckily, I was more confident than I used to be, so I started by, I kind of took out my phone and said, okay, I'm gonna call 911 now. So he backed off, and I went for my walk, and I didn't hear him anymore, so I figured, okay, I scared him off, great. And go a couple blocks, and just as I get across a street, the next block, I start hearing, like this heavy footfalls behind me. I'm like, okay, whatever, somebody's jogging, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I feel like the guy comes up and grabs my cane out of my hand and runs off. And that sort of deer in the headlights, like you have that moment where you're just like, huh? What the fuck
Hmm.
just happened? And like I just froze, because it's just like, did this just happen? Like, what? And like, I'm telling you, like, I just, full disclosure, and again, I'm sure people can relate. We're listening. I've never felt so vulnerable and weak, and 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 childish and whatever, in my life, at least as an adult. And but I stopped and reminded myself that, okay, it's okay to feel weak and vulnerable. Like, managing that is true strength. And I just, I said, okay, I got up my phone, I called 911, and I explained to them, and then I called my girlfriend, and again, I'm lucky, that I'm with a partner, who I didn't have any concerns about. She's not going to think any less of me or anything. um and she came, and the police came, and it was all straightened out. It was somebody who had some mental health issues in the neighborhood, and I got my cane back and everything. um but yeah, like, I guess the moral here, the takeaway that I want people to get is that, again, that idea of that it's okay to feel vulnerable, um but you learn from it, and you manage it, and that's true strength. And I think, like, she's never come out and expressed it, in so many words, but I think that a piece of that was moving forward from there was that like my girlfriend was even that much more confident in me as a partner.
Can we, if we just touch on the sort of uh, core qualities of masculinity or perceived masculinity, traditional masculinity? These are things that everyone can think of when you put them on the spot and say, "Tell me what you think of masculinity." And everyone has a common list of traits. Strength, being courageous, as Paul said, competence, um, sort of fear, no fear, uh, almost a go-getter attitude sort of thing. These are things that everyone can point these out. These are very broad and very common answers, but the definitions of which are almost individual. So there isn't really a true definition of masculine roles. That also just leaves that subtext of vulnerability not being a factor because it's perceived as weakness. But again, to Paul's point, let's play devil's advocate. Paul, what if you didn't take action, didn't call 911, didn't inform your girlfriend, and just stood there flailing your arms and were just completely dazed? And you stood there for hours, and then eventually when you came home and explained to your woman what happened and the fact that you did nothing, I think there would be a very different reaction than the fact that. So I think self-awareness is a huge part of it. And if that gets introduced to the textbook of masculinity and femininity, to be quite frankly, because these are both genderless, we would have a much easier time navigating this world.
Well, and if I may go back to talking like a coach for a minute, I that sounds like you're talking about it sounds like you're talking about intentionality, and that's an important concept for me. And forgive a quick plug. People can go on Facebook and look up my Facebook page, and I did a recent post. Well, it's not recent anymore now that people are, by the time people are hearing this, but I did a post about intentionality. And my point is that, yeah, like, first of all, there's that cliche but I do believe it's like, sometimes cliches are true, that not choosing is still a choice, but it's about, like you said, self-awareness, being aware, okay, yeah. And that was on some level, I think that was kind of what was going on in my brain, that okay, I have that option. I could just sit here and cry or whatever, just wait for someone to rescue me or whatever. And that would be okay. Like, that wouldn't mean that I'm suddenly not a man anymore or whatever, but I just, I could do that, or I could take action, but taking action feels better to me. Like, and it wasn't about, I have to act like a man, or this is acting like a woman, or this is acting like, but it's just, I want to be intentional. I want to make a choice. So, okay, here are my options. What feels right to me? And that's what I did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I think this is a good time to talk about, what you've done with your experiences, Paul. So we've talked a lot about, growing up, navigating adulthood, relationships, but Paul, from what I understand, you've taken this experience and your experiences maybe being in men's circles and turned it into a career, for lack of a better word, as a life coach. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like for you in everyday practice?
Well, I think I can start answering that by talking about another concept that's big for me with my coaching, which is that quote unquote failure. There's no such thing as failure. Like, failure is good because that's how you learn. So, like, and that was, I think, the only way that I was able to get where I am today in the end was that realization that the negative experiences that I've had. I mean, I went through, I mean, just all the stuff with, losing my, going totally blind, and then having a very high, what's the term, like, very hostile breakup with my ex-wife, and a custody battle, and I mean, it just made me stronger. Like, it just, like, that I learned, like, I took that as a learning experience. I mean, I'm not saying it was easy, but I learned from that, and that's what allowed me to get to the point where I was able to connect with the person who connected me to that it's called MDI, stands for Mentor, Discover, Inspire, the men's group that I got involved with. And it was through getting involved with them and seeing that, because again, I should say that I grew up with also with issues around shyness and isolating myself, not being comfortable around other people a lot of the time, and especially, I mean, I found I growing up, I related more to women than men, but I learned that through this group that I can also get along. There are also men that I can get along with, because they're not all stereotypical cavemen. I can relate to them, and through that, through their support and getting to know them and learning from them, that helped me get to the point where I realized that that my true passion and purpose was helping others to become their best selves, because this group, like in my experiences, helped me to be close, not my best, closer to my best self, because I see it as being one's best self is kind of like approaching the speed of light. You never quite get there, but it's about just getting closer and closer, as you go along. So so getting closer to my best self taught me that what I really want to do, what really matters to me, is helping others on that journey.
Yeah, that I so relate to that idea. I think that might be a bit of a misconception or a misunderstanding that, like if you're a helping professional, you're supposed to have your whole life together, right? You have this ideal, you're living this ideal life, you never make mistakes. And I think that it sounds like your approach, like very much like mine, is, we're human beings. We have experiences that we can share with other people, but we're on this journey. And like you said, I don't think there's ever a point where you're done, but you can get closer and closer to hopefully living the life that you want to live.
Right, because for one thing, I mean, coaching isn't about, I mean, you can get into the discussion of how, to what extent this happens with actual like mental health professionals, but for coaches, it's like, it's not about, I'm not there to tell you, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to do this and then this and then that, because I have the answers and here are the answers. No, I don't have the answers. Like I have things that I've learned from my own experiences, and maybe you can relate to those and learn something for yourself from that. But it's more like I'm here to help you to help yourself. I'm here to help you access the tools that are within yourself. And I guess that we can relate that back to blindness and masculinity, in that I know it's easier said than done, but if as a blind, man or woman, the more that when you're struggling, you remind yourself that it's not that I don't know what to do. It's not that I'm useless. Like, I have the tools within myself. It's just about remembering how to access them. But they are there, and that's what I'm there for. That's how I see my role, helping people to access and learn how to use those tools within themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a discussion to be had. I don't think we need to throw femininity and masculinity out the window and say, well, I think the good takeaway is, yes, do what you're good at, play to your strengths, and don't worry too much about what the label is. Because I think if we kind of put ourselves in these boxes of what men and women are supposed to do, we limit ourselves from reaching our potential, contributing, having meaningful relationships is the takeaway. I guess, we've covered so much ground today, and I feel like we could just keep going, but I want to end today by going back to you again, Paul and Jeff, and just, I guess, asking you to do the Herculean task of, I guess, summarizing or telling our listeners what is the biggest takeaway that you want people to have from this conversation. Like, what's a message for people who are listening to the podcast right now and thinking like, wow, I never really thought about this before, or maybe, men who are listening in and mulling it all over, all of the thoughts. So all it is to say, starting with you, Paul, what's the biggest thing that you want people to take away from the conversation that we've had today?
I guess the way that I would sum it up maybe is something like, yes, there is masculine and feminine, but they both have their have their good side and their bad side. Their advantages and disadvantages. There's a time for both. I think everybody has a certain amount of masculine and feminine inside them. Men have a majority masculine, women have a majority of traits they're feminine. But just celebrate, whether you're male or female, celebrate your masculine side and your feminine side, embrace them, love your, if I can get a little hippie here, love your whole self, masculine and feminine. Just like we, heart and head have to work together, masculine and feminine inside us have to work together, and it's all good.
Paul, you keep stealing my answers here. I wish you wouldn't do that. Just to build on Paul's point, I think it's fair to say that everyone goes through self-discovery growing up. Everyone thinks about, there are things about me that are more masculine, there are things about me that are more feminine, gender aside. And once you add disability into that, that does throw in another factor into it. But I think that the ultimate trait of masculinity, and I mean this strictly towards the men, is embrace your whole being, be proud of who you are, and wear it like armor. Because if you wear it like armor, then no one can use it against you, man or woman. They might not agree with you, they might not see eye to eye with you, but they respect you because they can't bully you out of that self-confidence. There's nothing they're going to say or do that will make you switch your convictions, and they'll respect you for that at the very least, and it only goes up from there.
For all of you saying that Paul stole your answer, I think you came back with a pretty good one there, Jeff. I think that if there's anything I'm taking away from this conversation is that we're not having enough of them, to be honest. I feel like, right? Like, I think that there's so much to explore with this topic. I think it's important that we hold space for masculinity or discussions of masculinity in all of its forms. And I think that we all benefit from having that conversation. As a woman, it was interesting to me to hear, or very helpful for me to hear, both of your journeys with masculinity and realizing how complicated it can be, how, some of that is, are these messages from society are things that you really had to grapple with, but ultimately in the end, you got to define what it was for you as, blind men. So I just wanted to thank both of you for your insights. And before we wrap up for today, I would just like to invite you to share how listeners can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your work.
Absolutely. So as I say, I have if you do a search online, I have a professional Facebook page. I call my business Out of Sight into Mind. And all the multiple meanings there. And how I get into the mental aspect of things. So it's called Out of Sight into Mind. If you look that up, you'll find my Facebook page. You can reach me on there or by email, which is OSIM with Paul, and that's because my other blind screen reader users will know that, or at least with JAWS, it says it as awesome with Paul. So I couldn't resist using that. So awesome with Paul, OSIM with Paul @gmail.com. And I have a LinkedIn page as well. You can look that up.
So I am on the internet at large. You can Google me. So Jeffrey, Jeffrey, Rainey, Rainey, like the climate, but with an E involved. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. My email address is jeffreyrainey94@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, again, I can't thank both of you enough, and a special thank you to Paul for being a first-time guest on the show, for sharing your experiences, for talking about the ways in which you mentor and lead. And honestly, I hope we have you back again sometime.
Me too. That would be awesome. Thank you for this opportunity.
Well, I'm looking forward to keeping the conversation going. In the meantime, thank you so much, Jeff and Paul. And that has been our podcast. All the best. And listeners, looking forward to hearing from you.
Hi, I'm Deborah Gold, CEO at Balance for Blind Adults and executive producer of the Living Blind podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode, the first of season 4. I want to thank our guests, Paul Mack and Jeffrey Rainey, for your interesting and sometimes very personal insights into this complex subject of masculinity as it relates to your lived experience. At the Living Blind podcast, this is what we're all about, the personal view from the inside out. As usual, I also want to thank our host, Naomi Hazlitt, our administrator, Ronachelle Coro, our new video editor, Jeffrey Young, and the whole team at Balance for Blind Adults for all your support. And for this last episode, produced by Jeff Rainey, thank you very much for your efforts. Finally, many thanks to our donors, without whom this podcast would not be possible. We'll see you next time on the Living Blind podcast.
My name is Deanna Carruthers, and I'm the Development Officer here at Balance for Blind Adults. It is time for the 5th annual Because of Balance campaign. Together, clients, current and former staff, board members, volunteers, and general community members come together to talk about the impact balance has had on their lives. Because of balance, life is better. Let's share the difference balance is making in all our lives and help build awareness of the small and mighty organization. Please consider joining as a fundraiser today by emailing me, Deanna, at development@balancefba.org. It's truly an incredible opportunity to give back to this amazing organization and help build awareness so that others can benefit from this great organization as well.